Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. And today we're going to be looking at a potential trade war brewing between the U.S. and the EU.
Really interesting stuff.
Yeah, it is. And we've got a recent YouTube news video script that we're going to be breaking down. And that really focuses in on President Trump's actions in this whole thing.
I think what is so interesting about this is just the choice of weapon here, you know, tariffs on alcohol.
Yeah.
It's kind of a culturally significant thing, wine, champagne, that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, so we're talking about President Trump threatening a 200% tariff on European alcohol.
Huge.
Pretty much anything you can think of wine, champagne. He really didn't mince words when he announced this on Truth Social.
No.
But can you give us just a quick rundown on tariffs?
Yeah.
What are they and how are they used in this kind of back and forth?
Sure. So think of the tariff as a tax on imported goods.
Okay.
And essentially it's a way for a country to protect its own industries by making foreign products more expensive.
Right.
It's also a really powerful tool to use in trade negotiations. So when one country will impose a tariff, it often triggers a retaliatory response from the other side.
I was going to say that's exactly what we're seeing here, because the EU didn't just sit back and take it. They countered with a 50% tariff on American whiskey.
Yeah. It's definitely a strategic move, and it really highlights just how interconnected global trade is,
Right.
This whiskey tariff is a response to the U.S. placing tariffs on steel and aluminum imports from the EU back in 2018.
Oh, wow. Okay, so this has been brewing for a while.
It has been brewing for a while, so it's not an isolated incident.
Got it.
It's part of this larger chain reaction.
So it's really like a chess match almost.
Yeah.
With each side trying to get, kind of one up the other.
For sure.
But let's zoom in on this whiskey tariff for a minute. Why target whiskey specifically?
Well, I think there's definitely a symbolic element.
Okay.
American whiskey is iconic.
Right.
Represents kind of American craftsmanship, heritage. Sure. So hitting it with a tariff sends a strong message, but there's also a really practical reason, and that's that the EU knows that this will hurt American producers, particularly in places like Kentucky and Tennessee, where whiskey production is a major industry.
Huge. Yeah, and we're talking about serious economic impact here.
Yes.
I mean, just to throw some numbers out there.
Yes.
The EU exported over 530 billion euros worth of goods to the U.S. in 2024.
Wow.
And that's while importing about 333 billion from us.
Okay.
So that's a pretty big trade surplus in their favor.
It is.
So is this, part of President Trump's America First policy?
It certainly aligns with his goals of reducing the trade deficit and promoting American industries.
Okay.
The America First policy is really all about prioritizing American economic interests and using a variety of tactics to achieve that goal.
Okay.
And tariffs are one of them, so it's a complex and controversial approach.
Right.
But I think it's crucial to understand the underlying logic of it.
Sure.
To make sense of all of this.
Yeah, so we've got these escalating tariffs.
Yeah.
This political kind of tug-of-war going on.
Yeah.
And potentially some big economic impacts.
Right.
But I think it's important to also look at the human side of all of this.
Yeah, for sure.
What do these tariffs mean for the people who work in these industries? From American whiskey distillers to European winemakers.
Yeah, that's where things get really interesting. And if we look at the American whiskey industry, they're facing this double whammy right now.
Right.
Not only are they potentially going to lose a big chunk of their export market in Europe, but they're also dealing with higher costs for materials like steel and aluminum.
Right, because of the previous tariffs.
Exactly.
Right.
So they're really feeling the pressure from both sides.
Yeah, and the impact goes way beyond just the distilleries themselves. I mean, think about all the related industries.
Oh, yeah?
The farmers who supply the grain, the trucking companies that transport the whiskey.
Right. The bars and restaurants that sell it. It's this huge ripple effect that could be felt across the entire economy.
Yeah, and that ripple effect is pretty huge when you think about it. The Distilled Spirits Council, which represents American whiskey producers, says that the industry supports over $200 billion in economic activity.
Right.
And employs 1.7 million people.
That's a lot of jobs.
That's a lot of jobs.
Yeah.
They also purchase billions of pounds of grain from American farmers every year. So if whiskey production takes a hit, those farmers are definitely going to feel it too.
Absolutely. I mean, it's not just about, a fancy drink or something. We're talking about livelihoods, interconnected industries. And what I think is really fascinating is that the CEO of the Distilled Spirits Council is actually pleading with both sides to come to what he calls a 0-for-0 tariff agreement.
Oh, interesting.
He's saying that everybody wins if they just get rid of these trade barriers.
A 0-for-0 agreement. I mean, that sounds like a pretty bold ask.
It is.
What would that look like? And is that even realistic?
So essentially, it would mean that both the US and the EU would have to agree to drop all these existing tariffs and then pledge to avoid imposing new ones.
Okay.
So basically, create a level playing field, reduce the cost for businesses, and hopefully lead to lower prices for consumers.
Right.
The big question is whether both sides can actually overcome their political differences and anxieties to make this happen.
It seems like it would be a tough sell, especially with how things are right now.
Yeah.
But let's look at the other side of this for a second. What would the impact be on American wine producers? Could they actually benefit from these tariffs?
In theory, yes.
Okay.
If European wines become way more expensive because of this 200% tariff, American consumers might start looking for something a little bit more affordable.
Okay.
And that could be a big opportunity for domestic winemakers to grab a larger market share.
Yeah, but it's not as simple as just switching from a French Bordeaux to a California Cabernet, right?
Yeah.
I mean, wine is about taste, regional preferences.
Oh, absolutely.
These established brands.
It's complicated.
Yeah.
Consumer behavior is a really complex thing, and the wine market is very, very nuanced.
Yeah.
So American wine producers would really need to capitalize on this strategically,
Right.
focus on quality marketing.
Right.
And try to appeal to people who might be hesitant to switch from those European labels that they're used to.
Yeah. So there's a potential upside, but it's not a sure thing. They've got a lot of work to do.
Yeah, for sure.
But what about the EU's response to all of this? Are they just going to, kind of sit back and take these tariffs?
Probably not.
Yeah.
I mean, they've already shown they're willing to retaliate.
Right. With the whiskey.
Exactly. And if the U.S. actually follows through with this 200% tariff on alcohol,
Yeah.
we could see an even wider range of counter tariffs on American goods, and those could target industries like agriculture or technology.
Oh, wow. So this could really escalate into a full-blown trade war.
It could.
Where both sides are just inflicting damage on each other? But what does that actually mean for, the average person?
Yeah.
How would a trade war actually affect our daily lives?
That's the million-dollar question, because it often gets lost in all the political back and forth.
Yeah. All the jargon.
Exactly. Trade wars tend to ripple through the economy.
Right.
And they lead to higher prices for us consumers.
Yeah.
Job losses in the affected industries, and this general feeling of economic uncertainty.
Right. It's a lose-lose situation for everybody.
Pretty much, yeah.
So we've got escalating tariffs,
Right.
the potential for retaliation, and the possibility of a trade war
Yeah.
with consequences we can't even imagine right now.
Yeah.
It's not a great picture, but before we,
Yeah.
totally panic, is there a way out of this maze?
There is, but it requires both sides to kind of change their thinking.
Okay.
The first step is to, cool down the rhetoric and recognize that trade isn't this, zero-sum game.
So put down the Twitter fingers.
Exactly.
Pick up the phone.
Yeah.
Have an actual conversation.
Have a conversation, rebuild that trust, and start finding things that they can agree on.
Right.
The goal should be to create a relationship that benefits both the U.S. and the EU,
Right.
not to, find a winner and a loser.
A win-win.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like finding that common ground, that win-win is really the ideal scenario here.
For sure.
But what about all these concerns that we hear from both sides?
Right.
The trade deficits, protecting their industries, fair competition, all that. I mean, these are all valid concerns.
They are, and they definitely need to be addressed, in any kind of trade negotiations.
Right.
But tariffs are kind of a blunt instrument,
Right.
They can have all these unintended consequences, and sometimes they actually end up hurting the industries they're supposed to be protecting.
Right. So what are some alternatives to this, this tariff back and forth?
Well, instead of putting up all these trade barriers, why don't we invest in making American workers more competitive?
How do we do that?
Well, through things like education, workforce training. We could also provide incentives for businesses to innovate and develop new technologies.
Sure.
Another option is to focus on negotiating trade agreements that address really specific issues,
Okay.
like, intellectual property protection or making sure there's fair market access.
Gotcha.
So there are a lot of different ways to approach this.
So it's really about being more proactive and collaborative
Exactly.
instead of just, reactive and protectionist. But let's be real for a second. These trade negotiations are super complicated
They are.
and they can drag on forever.
Yeah.
So in the meantime, what can the average person do? you know?
Right.
We feel like we're just stuck in the middle.
Well, that's where informed citizenship comes in.
Okay.
Educate yourself about the issues, try to understand the different perspectives,
Right.
and support the businesses that are being affected by all of this.
Yeah.
Most importantly, though, contact your elected officials and tell them what you think. Because at the end of the day, trade policy is shaped by public opinion and political will.
So we're not totally powerless. We can actually make a difference.
Exactly. Your voice matters.
That's a good reminder that even these huge global issues like trade wars, they actually have, local impacts.
For sure.
And what we do can really contribute to shaping a better global trading system.
Absolutely.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive
Yeah, I have.
into the world of trade wars, tariffs. And I think, this quest for some kind of economic balance leaves me with a sense of urgency,
Yeah.
but also a little bit of hope.
I agree. It's complicated, it's challenging, but it's a conversation that we need to have.
It is, for sure. And a huge thank you to you for helping us break all of this down.
Happy to be here.
And of course, to all of you for listening in. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into a topic that matters. But until then, stay curious, stay engaged, and as always, keep those critical thinking caps on.